The worst coworker ever. A couple of years ago, I worked as a door-to-door salesperson selling home renovation services. It wasn't exactly my dream job, but I needed the money, and jobs weren't exactly plentiful during the COVID lockdowns. Most days involved driving around suburban neighborhoods with a partner, knocking on doors, and trying to convince homeowners that they desperately needed new windows, roofing, siding, or whatever promotion the company was pushing that week. The work was rough. People rarely wanted to talk to strangers at their doorstep during a pandemic, let alone buy expensive home renovations. Still, I showed up every day because I had bills to pay. One of the people I regularly worked with happened to be the son of one of the managers. From what I could tell, several higher-ups treated the company as a sort of family employment program. This guy certainly didn't seem worried about losing his position. Every morning I had to drive out to a wealthy gated community to pick him up. He fit every stereotype of a spoiled rich kid. While the rest of us were trying to make sales, he did the absolute minimum required to avoid getting yelled at. Sometimes he would knock on a few doors before disappearing back into the car. More often than not, he sat scrolling through his phone while everyone else worked. The most irritating part was his attitude toward other people's food. We'd usually stop somewhere in the morning to grab snacks and drinks for the day. Somehow he always seemed to believe that anything left unattended belonged to him. Bags of chips, candy bars, drinks, it didn't matter. If it was in the car, there was a good chance he'd help himself to it. One day he drank most of a large bottle of soda I'd bought for myself. Didn't ask. Didn't offer to replace it. Just finished it. That was when I decided to have a little fun. The next morning, before picking him up, I stopped at a convenience store and bought several large bottles of soda along with multiple bags of Fritos. Salty Fritos. We spent the day canvassing one of those endless suburban developments where every street looks exactly the same. Rows upon rows of nearly identical houses stretched in every direction. There weren't any shops nearby, no restaurants, no gas stations, just houses. Management loved these neighborhoods because they were full of older, wealthier homeowners who were supposedly more likely to spend money on renovations. As expected, my coworker immediately started raiding the snacks. By lunchtime, every bag of Fritos was gone. Then came the soda. All that salt left him thirsty, and he started working through the bottles one after another. Every time I glanced over, he seemed to be taking another drink. Perfect. To make things even better, I casually offered him bottled water. "Stay hydrated," I said. He happily accepted. About an hour later, after spending most of the afternoon sitting in the car while I unsuccessfully pitched renovations to strangers, he finally spoke up. "Hey, I really need a bathroom." I looked around theatrically. "Yeah, we'll find somewhere after we finish this block." At that point, it was obvious the drinks were catching up to him. He shifted constantly in his seat and kept glancing around as though a restroom might magically appear. Since it was my car, there wasn't much he could do except wait. Naturally, I decided to take my time. At the next house, I stretched out my sales presentation as long as humanly possible. I walked through every brochure page, explained every service, answered questions nobody had asked, and generally dragged things out. The entire time I knew he was sitting in the car getting increasingly desperate. By the time we finished the block and returned to the vehicle, he looked miserable. His legs were crossed so tightly they practically formed a knot. Trying my best to sound helpful, I suggested we drive to a nearby McDonald's. The drive itself was wonderfully unhurried. I stopped fully at every stop sign. Obeyed every speed limit. Took absolutely no shortcuts. When we finally arrived, his expression briefly brightened. Then he noticed the doors were locked. COVID restrictions. Drive-through only. The look on his face was priceless. He was genuinely angry now and doing everything possible not to lose control. I apologized, shrugged, and pointed out that we'd already wasted enough time. We should really get back to work. The next hour was one of the most entertaining of my sales career. While I continued knocking on doors, he remained in the passenger seat, squirming, fidgeting, crossing and uncrossing his legs, and generally looking like someone engaged in a desperate battle against biology itself. Eventually the workday ended. The moment I got back into the car, he asked if I could drive him home immediately. Instead, I suddenly remembered a completely fictional emergency at my apartment that required my urgent attention. Terrible timing, really. I explained that I couldn't make the full trip but could get him closer to home. So I dropped him off downtown, still several miles from the gated community where he lived. As he got out of the car, he looked like a man carrying the weight of the world, or at least several liters of soda and water. I drove away while he hurried off in search of the nearest bathroom. Was it petty? Absolutely. Do I regret it? Not even a little. The secret we buried for years. Back in the 1990s, my brothers and I attended a tiny elementary school in a rural town. The school was small enough that everyone knew everyone. There were only a handful of classrooms, a modest playground, and a sports area where we spent most of our breaks. Life was simple, and for kids, there was always something to do. Our mother worked at a nearby vocational high school. When that school eventually shut down, she was transferred elsewhere, but our family remained in the staff housing that belonged to the education system. The building sat on the edge of the old school grounds, far away from the main road. Outside of school hours, the place felt almost abandoned, which made it the perfect playground for 4 adventurous brothers. One part of school life that everyone dreaded was the lunchroom. It was run by a cook and 2 older women who seemed to enjoy making children miserable. They shouted constantly, punished students for the smallest mistakes, and ruled the cafeteria through intimidation. If someone talked too loudly, they were humiliated in front of everyone. If a child complained about the food, they were scolded. Many students were afraid of them. One day, one of my brothers decided he had enough. Instead of eating in the cafeteria, he and a friend pooled their pocket money and bought bread and sliced meat from local shops. They spent lunchtime having their own picnic instead. When the cafeteria staff realized 2 students were missing, panic spread quickly. Teachers started asking questions, and the lunch ladies demanded to know where the boys had gone. None of us said a word. Even our youngest brother, barely old enough to understand the situation, kept the secret. Eventually the boys returned and explained exactly why they had skipped lunch. Their story spread throughout the town. Parents began talking, complaints surfaced, and the behavior of the cafeteria staff became public knowledge. What had started as 2 kids avoiding lunch turned into a scandal that reached local officials. For the first time, those women were forced to answer for how they treated students. Still, that wasn't the revenge we remember most. A few years later, just before our family moved away, summer vacation had already begun. We spent our days riding bikes around the empty school grounds. One afternoon, while practicing tricks near the cafeteria building, we noticed something unusual. Someone had left a large ring of keys hanging in the door. Not just a few keys, either. There were dozens of them, neatly labeled and color-coded. We immediately recognized them as belonging to the cafeteria staff. As responsible young troublemakers, we made sure the building was locked up properly. Then, instead of turning the keys in, we decided they deserved a safer hiding place. We found an old metal can, placed the entire key ring inside, packed it tightly with dirt and stones, and buried it in a ditch only a few steps from the cafeteria. We were surprisingly thorough for a group of kids. The following weeks were filled with rumors about the missing keys. People searched everywhere. New locks had to be installed, replacement keys ordered, and plenty of frustration followed. To this day, I doubt anyone ever found them. As far as I know, that rusty tin can is probably still sitting underground, hidden just a few yards from where those cafeteria ladies once spent their days terrorizing children. Instant career karma. For years, my dad was the backbone of a small flooring company. He wasn't the owner, but if you asked any customer who did the best work, his name would come up every time. He handled everything from installing floors to fixing small problems for clients, and people specifically requested him because they knew he cared about the quality of his work. The company owner, who I'll call Andrew, had known my dad for years. They started in the industry together and were close friends at one point. Andrew often talked about how valuable my dad was to the business and even hinted that one day he might take over when Andrew retired. The problem was that the praise never translated into fair pay. My dad worked long hours, took on difficult jobs, and dealt with injuries that most people would have quit over. Over the years he suffered cuts, burns, electric shocks, and even lost part of a thumb in a workplace accident. Despite everything, he kept showing up and bringing in customers. Eventually, he asked for a raise. Andrew agreed. Months passed. Nothing changed. My dad asked again. Once more, Andrew promised to sort it out. Again, nothing happened. This cycle continued for years. Every time the topic came up, there was a new excuse. The company supposedly couldn't afford it. Yet Andrew lived in a large house, drove expensive vehicles, and seemed to have money for every luxury except rewarding the employee responsible for much of the company's success. The friendship between them slowly deteriorated. What started as frustration eventually became disappointment. My dad realized he wasn't being treated as a partner or even a valued worker. He was simply being taken for granted. Instead of arguing, he started making a plan. With support from my mom and me, he began preparing to launch his own business. We helped create advertisements, spread the word locally, and build an online presence. I even started helping with social media and recording videos of completed projects. Slowly but surely, customers started reaching out directly. When everything was ready, my dad handed in his notice. Suddenly, Andrew became desperate. The same raise that had supposedly been impossible for years was immediately offered. Then came more promises, better conditions, and requests for him to stay. But by then it was too late. My dad had already made his decision. Within weeks of opening his own business, he was fully booked. Customers followed him because they trusted his work, and recommendations spread quickly. For the first time in years, he was earning what his skills were actually worth. The best part came afterward. After my dad left, Andrew struggled to keep up with the workload. To replace one experienced employee, he ended up hiring 3 separate workers. Combined, their wages cost far more than the raise my dad had originally requested. In the end, all Andrew had to do was pay one loyal employee fairly. Instead, he lost his best worker, damaged a long friendship, and ended up spending even more money trying to replace him. Meanwhile, my dad is happier than ever, his business continues to grow, and his schedule is booked weeks in advance. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's succeeding after someone underestimated your value. Bad neighbor, bad karma. When my wife and I bought our house 4 years ago, we thought we'd found the perfect place to settle down. The property inspection went smoothly, the city approved everything, and no one mentioned a single issue with the neighboring lot. There was only one strange thing. A fence belonging to our elderly neighbor stretched across part of our property. It ran from the corner of his house all the way to the side of ours, cutting off access to a narrow strip of land that technically belonged to us. It wasn't a huge area, just a long patch of grass, and since the neighbor maintained it, we didn't think much about it. For the first year, everything seemed fine. Then I noticed a small amount of water entering the basement after a series of unusually heavy storms. After inspecting the area, I realized the ground sloped slightly toward my house. To prevent future flooding, I hired a landscaping company the following spring to regrade the soil and install proper drainage. The workers had barely started when my neighbor stormed outside. According to my wife, he looked about 20 years older than he actually was, and he acted like it too. He immediately began yelling at the crew, accusing them of trespassing and damaging his property. The workers were confused because several contractors had used that same area before without any complaints. Eventually they ignored him, finished the job, and left behind a neat flower bed ready for planting. The following year, I planted roses there and hired another company for routine landscaping. Once again, the moment workers stepped near that side yard, the neighbor exploded. He shouted insults, demanded they leave, and even made a weak attempt to swipe at one of them. Then he started throwing around random racist insults that made absolutely no sense. Rather than argue, I told the crew to leave that section alone. My wife and I decided that if he was going to treat anyone who touched the area like an enemy, we simply wouldn't maintain it anymore. By the end of summer, weeds towered several feet high. The next spring brought plenty of rain, and the overgrowth returned even worse. One afternoon while I was mowing, the neighbor actually climbed over the fence and demanded to know when I planned to clean up the mess. I told him the truth, as soon as he stopped harassing anyone who worked there. That answer only made him angrier. He called me lazy, insulted me repeatedly, and threatened to report me. So I shrugged and told him to call the city. The very next day, a code enforcement officer knocked on my door. After looking around, he seemed puzzled. My lawn was cut, my landscaping was neat, and the property was in good condition. When I showed him the overgrown area, he immediately noticed something far more important: the neighbor's fence was illegally blocking access to part of my land. The officer laughed. Instead of citing me, he informed me that my neighbor had 10 days to remove the fence. While reviewing the property, he also noticed several code violations on the neighbor's side, including weeds growing through his patio and neglected walkways. The next morning, the neighbor's wife came over and politely asked whether I would help pay for removing the fence. I reminded her that, according to her husband, I was just a bitch, and unfortunately our charity budget was empty that week. Now every day I watch the old man dismantling the fence he fought so hard to keep. He even had to call his adult children for help because the project was too much for him alone. The funniest part is that none of this would have happened if he had simply left people alone. Once the fence is gone, I'm moving my roses somewhere I can actually enjoy them. The flower bed is being removed and replaced with gravel. If my neighbor wants a view of that side yard so badly, then that's exactly what he'll get. Sometimes revenge isn't about doing anything dramatic. Sometimes it's just sitting back and letting someone's own bad attitude create all of their problems for them.